Welcome to First Builders, the podcast for those who build companies from the ground up. I'm Amber Illig, General Partner at the Council Capital.
And I'm Rachel Tsui, Partner at the Council. Every week, we sit down with builders who are doing hard things in hard places. And today, we're talking to someone whose career reads like a greatest hits album of the developer tools era.
Our guest has spent the last decade building the platforms that builders use. She was an infrastructure engineer at Heroku, founding member of Slack's platform team, and first product manager at Figma, where she launched Figma Organization, Casual, the product that brought entire companies into a design tool that had previously belonged only to individual designers.
And after Figma, she led product at Webflow during the peak of the no-code wave, and now she's VP of product at Render, the developer cloud that's helping businesses ship faster and easier than ever. And she's also an angel investor and based here in San Francisco.
And what ties all of it together is a very particular craft, building for builders, making the tools that let other people make things. It's a discipline that looks different from every other kind of product work, and Meagan has done it longer and at more scale than almost anyone.
Meagan, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome to First Builders.
Thank you both for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, let's dive in and we'll start at the beginning. So your origin story is probably maybe not always like the typical tech path. Curious about how you ended up from Columbia to becoming an infrastructure engineer at Heroku. What happened kind of in between that? What led you from like research into that engineering role?
Yeah, well, I sometimes describe my early 20s as being this period of deep discovery and change. Had done undergrad in biology. And actually before that, when I was in high school, I was doing like academic research as well. And so I never had any inkling that I'd end up in the private sector, let alone at a tech company. Essentially, like many people, sort of graduated from college, was really thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, was going to go work in a lab, and kind of had this realization that I had some student loans. I wanted to sort of set myself up on a better path financially. And I decided to take what I describe often as a rumspringa to Silicon Valley, take like a break from academia, go off, write code for a couple years.
Yeah.
Pay off some student loans and then, come back. And what happened was I landed at Heroku, and I was, I believe, the first woman in engineering there. I was very young, and I was working on an infrastructure team. And I just like immediately fell in love with tech. The feedback loops were much faster than what we had in lab. I really loved just like the business aspects of it. Very quickly after I arrived, the Black Friday season emerged, and at Heroku at the time was running a number of different major e-commerce sites. And so we had to work with our customers to make sure that the service was going to be reliable during that period. And it was just so exciting and engaging that I stayed. And I feel really, really grateful that my young self sort of jumped out of the comfort zone and kind of actually flew to California, moved here sight unseen. And I was that I
awesome.
kind of got to build from there, which was very cool.
That is super
awesome.
cool.
And just kind of building on that, I mean, Heroku in its peak years was the platform that kind of convinced a generation of developers that infrastructure could be more simple. What was it like to be inside of that, and what did it sort of teach you about, or early on in your career, about what developers actually want, including yourself?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think when I think about Heroku, the thing that stands out in my memory is just the commitment to craft. And that extended from how thoughtful the team was about how to construct the CLI and that very famous Git push Heroku workflow, which, launched 1,000 dreams into. And I think that commitment to craft really permeated every aspect of how the company operated. We would have very particular ways that we talked about the brand. When you looked at the brand representation during that time, really the pixel level craft of everything that was on the website, all of the swag, everything the customers interacted with, the developers interacted with, just exuded that sort of commitment to detail and to style. And I think that really resonates with developers, even more so than the technical specifications or the elegance of what Heroku was doing. It was this belief that technical work could be aesthetically excellent, and really the way in which that company was able to embody that from every layer, from the the underlying decisions we were making in the infrastructure team through different aspects of the product, through different aspects of the brand, that I think is is Heroku's sort of like most significant legacy. And you see other DevTools companies carrying that baton today. And that I think has become just like at the time, I think Heroku was one of the first to really lean into design in that way. But I think since then, it's become almost accepted wisdom that developers really sort of connect with brand and with identity in that way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And we'll get into Figma later, but I feel like there's a really interesting parallel there in that you sort of created a place for developers to come together and like be celebrated, and like this is a high craft activity and it deserves sort of next level products and companies thinking about the profession. And it seems like Figma did that many years later for designers. So I think that's a powerful lesson even for other companies being founded right now.
Yeah. And then obviously you made that transition over from engineering to product. For a lot of engineers, that might be a little bit challenging. It could be just very different, right? Because you're going from like the execution, or at least from the outside in, it looks like you're going from the execution to more of like that strategy. You have to influence like where the roadmap is going. How was that for you when you were navigating that transition? And what surprised you about moving to product versus engineering?
Yeah, so I had a fairly unique path that I don't know many people who've had a similar journey. I moved first into engineering management. And the reason for that was that when I was at Heroku, we didn't have as much of a product function built out as other companies might have. It was very classic of a lot of DevTools companies where many decisions were owned in engineering. On the JD for EMs, it said like product management was a bullet point. And so I was like, oh, actually, I think I want to try my hand at this. And the impetus to do that was how much I enjoyed talking to customers. As an engineer, I actually still write code. I love building, but I really liked flexing different skills during the day, talking to customers, thinking about the market, thinking about opportunity. And the place initially to do that was in engineering management. So I spent a little over a year in engineering management. And then when I had the opportunity to join Slack, I actually joined as a software engineer. But I told them in my interview process that I really wanted to move into product. And I was really fortunate to land on the platform team where I had some champions and advocates who were willing to help me make that transition and coach me through it. So I think having that kind of like, two-step motion into product was really helpful because I got to sort of build a lot of the sort of stakeholder management alignment skills and at least try them on and then kind of make that more complete transition later on.
Yeah. And, Slack is just one of the many awesome career moves that you made, Heroku, Slack, Webflow, Figma. And so before we get into that next move, what is it about some of these companies that you see, particularly if we have any younger listeners, listening to this podcast, or even parents of kids that are, kind of graduating into this arena? Like, obviously you had to get the opportunity to begin with, but then even just being able to see amongst multiple opportunities, what could be the next Slack? Do you have any advice for folks navigating that right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that picking is obviously something that you guys think a lot about from an investing perspective. As an employee, especially when you join later stage, you're very much advantaged because there's so much more information about the companies available to you. So a couple of things that I've always done. First of all, follow your smartest friends, which is definitely how I got into Slack. I had some great colleagues I had a lot of respect to who were starting to think about moving to Slack. And I was early in my career, really looking for opportunities for growth. And I talked to them. I talked to people around me about the founding team, and a few people said to me like, well, if you want to go learn product, there's like nobody in the world better to learn product from than like Stuart Butterfield. So go work for him and see how he thinks. And I think that was really, really sound advice. It's really using your network, using the people you know, and understanding where you want to grow, especially early in your career, and finding the people who are world-class at that and going to work for them. Because even if, I think a lot of the ethos around the sort of first builders idea is kind of tied into this, when you find those really exceptional people, ideally people who have like very clear track records, it's people know about them, and you want to just, as an employee, you want to figure out how do you make sure you understand where the excellence is in the ecosystem, and then align yourself to that, because you'll learn a lot, and you'll ideally have like a really good outcome, both from a career perspective, career growth, financially, and otherwise.
That's awesome. And back to Slack, you were basically a founding member of Slack's platform team. So you were, really defining what it meant to build on Slack as a platform before any external developers had done it. So curious, what did you get right early? What did you learn and get embarrassingly wrong in those early days? How did it become what it is today?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of what we got right about the platform was related to how we started to expose all of the primitives that make Slack programmatically for builders. So one of the things that I actually contributed to a lot was making the user identity available for developers so they could build bots in Slack. And I think
Cool.
that, being able to message and sort of engage with those entities from a development perspective was, what unlocked a lot of the platform's greatest successes, like Donut, which I'm sure many of you have interacted with in
Yes.
a workplace. There was Troops, which was a company that got sold to Salesforce for connecting your Salesforce data into Slack, and a few others. I think that where the platform, um, could have maybe been more, sort of had more success. I think, some of the things that I think about now, especially where we are today with LLMs and the interaction between using tools like Claude and in ChatGPT with knowledge work. I think some of the things that maybe we didn't quite get right out of the gate um, included what exactly the right interactions would be for apps. So in the one way that I think it was great that we had sort of bots and that people could send messages to apps and that all worked really well. I think we could have moved a little bit faster around creating more natural interfaces in the Slack messages for people to interact. So for example, we eventually launched things like BlockKit and other tools that allowed people to put buttons in messages so
Mhm.
that you could engage and act on tasks more easily. And I think we could have potentially moved a little bit faster on that. And what that would have achieved is bringing more work into the Slack that you didn't have to sort of go to all these other
Outside,
surfaces
yeah.
for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really building that workflow of what people would
exactly.
naturally already operate in.
Exactly,
Yeah, I love
exactly.
that. Awesome. And then moving on to after Slack, when you were at Figma, launching Figma organization, obviously it's very different when you're kind of like expanding beyond what the original audience might have been using Figma for, especially for individual designers and going, for cross companies, cross functional teams, things like that. That can sometimes be really challenging. How did you approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, in the very early days, a lot of what we were trying to do was actually just solve this problem of proliferation. So we had early customers who were so enthusiastic about Figma, and that's like what you really want to see. Like they didn't want the product like ripped out of their cold dead hands. But what was happening was the way the product was architected meant that some of our larger companies would have different, Figma accounts for different parts of the organization. And so it was a combinatorial chaos. Like people were, you had to create multiple accounts to the company coming to mind right now is Uber. If you worked on the driver app, you had one Figma account, but then if you collaborated with somebody on the writer account, you had another Figma account. And what that meant was we were starting to see an erosion of our value prop at scale. So the first thing that we did was we brought all of those different accounts under one roof so that you had streamlined billing, governance, and most importantly, collaboration access. And if you think about Figma, what makes Figma incredible is how easy it has made collaboration for design. There are people that I work with in my team at Render today who don't have no idea what it was like before Figma. And I'm really glad for
Yeah.
them because, it was very challenging to get access to your designer's latest design. They would send you something over email, or maybe you had InVision or something to have a way to look at in progress work, but generally it was not happening.
Envision is the best
So yeah,
blast from the past for me, for sure. I remember seeing
Hmm.
those like at my old startup. Yeah,
yeah,
like all the
yeah,
mock-ups from there. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first insight, just like solving that problem. And then from there, we thought a lot about like, well, what's the right hierarchy to have in terms of organizing content within large companies? And how do you organize your design systems and things of that nature? So I think really the takeaway was making it possible for these teams to collaborate across like both the breadth and depth. So the breadth being across the company, and then depth being all the different works and problems you're trying to solve within your team or within your part of the org was really the challenge before Figma at that time.
Switching gears a little bit here. Now you're at Render, running product, and would love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing there and what made you make the move from Webflow to Render.
Yeah. So when I made the move to Render, GPT-3 had just come out, and I had this. We talked a little bit about, my career and how I've made these choices. I think when I was choosing to go to Slack and Figma, I had two things in my favor. One, SaaS was sort of established. We kind of had an idea of what excellent looked like. And so you could talk to people and find who was really good at it. And then B, we didn't have any major disruptive technologies. We were just innovating within the cloud wave. But with GPT, it looked really different. And this was, for all of us, and in particular, for the first time in my career. And I really wanted to go work on a platform, because when you work on a platform, you just get this breadth of visibility across, how different developers are innovating. And I wanted to kind of have that visibility as in a sense, the way I thought about it was like re-established my sense of what excellent looked like in this, what I genuinely believed then and believe now is going to be this very new era of computing. So I made the leap to Render, and this was my first time also leading product. And so it was this very exciting opportunity to build a world-class product team from the ground up. And I also had the great privilege of also building design and data, and just sort of being part of general company formation as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And what have you learned from building a team, and how do you sort of see that adapting as AI is just taking on more and more? There's obviously something dropping every single week about how this is implicating all of us, or, just rumored to be implicating all of us. So I would love to hear how you've sort of been leading through all of these changes dropping right and left.
Yeah. So in terms of team building, I think the biggest thing that I've taken from my time at Render is you really have to think about building teams as if you're building products. And what I mean by that is for every role that you're hiring for, particularly in product management, there's an organizational problem that you're trying to solve. It's not nearly as clean as I want somebody to set roadmap for my core product team or my enterprise team. It's really, if things were really clear, like extremely clear from a strategy perspective, then in theory, an engineer and designer should just pair together and go run after that problem. But it's because you're trying to solve for some kind of ambiguity. And the biggest thing I've taken away from this experience is to be very, very clear before I open the rec about like what exactly that organizational pain is. And then in a DevTools context, because I think that DevTools product management is actually like a really special discipline in and of itself, because you really have to have the mind of an engineer and the strategic sense of a very strong product manager. Getting really clear about where in our industry is the most excellent talent being trained. And so talent mapping, especially as a hiring manager at a very early stage company, became an important tool for me. Understanding which of the best like DevTools companies were having decisions being made through product management and not engineering. And sort of, again, here calling back to my earlier career at Heroku, where a lot of decision making did happen through engineering, and understanding where that wasn't happening, because that was going to be where I wanted to like hire excellent product management talent from. So definitely was a pretty significant investment from like a time perspective, but also just like being really clear about fundamentally what skill set I was looking for in terms of how I approached kind of like building that team. And this holds true also for design as well.
Yeah. And obviously being at a very early stage company or an earlier stage company, how did you convince people, to leave, right? Like getting the talent that you wanted to have as you did all this talent mapping?
So I think there are a couple different dimensions of it. I think on the lowest level, when you're thinking about what we were building at Render, which is we're building a platform that we intend to be the next level of abstraction for how developers interact with the cloud. And you can think about this through the grand arc of actually, should I introduce Render a little bit? Because some of your listeners may not know
it'd be great
Render.
to back up and
cool.
tell us what Render does.
Yeah. So let me sort of maybe back up a little bit and talk about Render. So Render is a modern cloud application platform, and we serve all kinds of developers, but in specific, we really serve developers building full stack apps and agents and what we call internally AI apps. But those are full stack apps that have some sort of inference component. And the genesis of this this platform really actually harkens back to my time at Heroku, when Heroku was built, because building on AWS can be really complicated and really taxing. But the downside of Heroku was that it was really rigid. And over the 2010s, a lot of different infrastructure innovation happened that made it possible for deployment to actually be really flexible, even if it was in a managed context. Render is a cloud application platform, and our motivation right now is to provide a way for developers to ship their products to the cloud faster than ever before. And the reason we're seeing such a pull from the market right now in this new era is twofold. One, a lot of people are building these vibe coded apps that are useful to them, but maybe useful for their company, and they need a place to deploy it. And it doesn't make sense to go learn the AWS console. So having a place like Render is a really fantastic fit. And the other is that it's very competitive for new entrants, for new startups. And so startups are coming online, they want to have really fast cycle time. And Render gives them that flexibility because we allow them to not have to worry at all about infrastructure. They can focus on the product and they can ship really iteratively very quickly. And so we're finding that just has tremendous tailwinds, and we're growing very quickly.
How do you convince like all of the top talent to leave then and then join Render?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of what we're building and what people get really excited about is being part of the journey that these new startups are going through, building software in this new way and wanting to have a piece of that, play a role in their success. And so a lot of the sell for Render is that it's, you can come build Render, and then what you're doing in a sense is unlocking the growth and scale of these other AI companies that are being built on the platform.
Yeah, and I love it. I can hear kind of just like even your passion around that, like when you were describing what Render does and what the promise of it really holds as well. So I'm sure that can be very inspiring, especially for folks who are looking for that kind of purpose or mission in their building.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about vibe coding and how it's, there's so much pull from the market because people are building a lot right now. So curious to get your thoughts on some of these takes out there right now, like the SaaS apocalypse. What do you think where do you think we're actually heading as an industry? What do you think is overblown or underblown?
Yeah. So having been at Webflow and sort of been at the center of some of the no code building era, I have a little bit of a skepticism about the SaaS apocalypse, because what I have taken away from no code is that truly at the end of the day, only a small percentage of us as humans are truly builders. A lot of people have obviously enormous wide breadth of strengths, but not many people are actually really excited about the idea of tinkering on a problem or building a product around it. And I think that LLMs and sort of coding agents and vibe coding platforms do expand that market a bit. But I think it's easy to be persuaded that market is much, much, much larger than it very likely is, or very likely is over the next 2 to 3 years, after the kind of initial sort of enthusiasm wears off a bit. And so what that means, I think, is that people are not going to stop buying SaaS because there's so many problems in your company that it's not worthwhile to have Sally down the hall being the core maintainer and builder for. So you're going to want to have somebody, just even for a SLA and reliability perspective of any of the software that you're using, you're going to want to buy it from someone else because they're going to maintain it. I think that's overlooked a lot in our SaaS apocalypse debates at this point.
Yeah, completely agree. We've been talking about that a little bit at the council recently too, because we've been vibe coding more on the back end here. And it is really exciting when you get in there. You're like, wow, I can do so much. But it's not like, a silver bullet, like you press a button and everything you ever dreamed of just comes to life in front of your face. It does take tinkering. And like you said, not everybody wants to do that. And that does take time. It might not take as many engineers as it used to do one single task, but it does take time. So, and then similarly, another sort of question that I'm sure you're used to getting when you go out anywhere right now, but what do you think sort of the future of creative work? Because you've worked at places like Figma, and you worked on the developer side a lot with builders. There's obviously a lot of public debate around that. So would love to hear your thoughts there. And that piece on designers that was dropped last week or maybe over the weekend, it's been very spicy. So
yeah. So I think that at the end of the day, the limiting factor on new startups and new software is not necessarily even taste or your ability to create it at all. It's actually some amount of commercial sense. Like really understanding what is valuable and what kind of solution actually is worth building and worth sharing. I think what's going to happen here is that we have so many people who are going to be who are already very, very skilled. And it's not really a question of whether or not they know how to code or know how to design. It's just that they themselves have that urge to tinker, that urge to solve problems, and more importantly, the discipline and insight around identifying and solving the problems that matter. Those people are going to be totally supercharged by AI and these tools. And that's kind of right now the true, I think, limiting on us.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's a lot of like what we talk about, like around like just needing the expertise to understand the problem deeply and figuring out, again, like the solution. Like, of course, creating and building a solution around it. But yeah, you have to really understand that and have that expertise to be able to build the right thing. Um, so yeah, would love to hear just also how you think about just like the concept around like ecosystems, right? Like you have like the Slack platform, you have all of these Figma plugins and like that collaborative aspect of Figma. Render has I think a marketplace as well. So what separates kind of an ecosystem that really compounds over time versus one that just launches and maybe gets a little bit of press and dies? Like, how do you guys think about that? And how have you seen that successfully work in your career?
Yeah, I think that the first thing I'll say about this is that ecosystems and platforms in general are incredibly hard to build, and there are a few that are truly enduringly successful. And I think we all know those. Salesforce, Salesforce sort of app platform, I think is really set apart in terms of the amount of value and especially commercial value that it itself generates for
Yeah.
Salesforce. I think what I think is really true about excellent platforms is that there's a few different things, and it kind of falls back to, things that make any product very excellent. But the first thing is uh, really having a strong understanding of what your core product is excellent at and what its core differentiation is and what its core value is to the customer. And then deliberately choosing partners that complement and extend that versus either challenge or are irrelevant to what that core value is. And so, to that end, when you think about Slack, it's not surprising at all that something like Donut would have been like one of the most successful breakout apps, because the core value of Slack at the end of the day is actually the relationships that you have and are sort of developing from a communication perspective on the platform. And so the platform investments that are sort of most valuable on top of that are those that leverage that core value. The other thing I've learned is that a lot of what you want to do from an ecosystem perspective is make and create more value for your customers. And when that is your goal, which I think in a lot of ways is our goal at Render, what we're doing is we are acknowledging and seeing how our customers work with both Render and other platforms. So for example, we have a lot of observability integrations. That's not because Render itself doesn't have observability in terms of like apps running on our cloud. It's because we know that most customers are actually multi-cloud. And so when they want to look and see what's happening across Render, across what's happening in other parts of their systems, they probably are going to use another observability tool that gives them that single pane of glass. And so in that way, we're sort of supporting and acknowledging kind of the core needs of our customers. I think a lot of, the work that we've done from an ecosystem perspective in Render has been much more of that shape, partnering with Vanta, partnering with Datadog and others like that. But I think that for the companies that are sort of most successful and most what we've seen in like the cloud era, most sort of have the most dominant platform strategies, it's mostly been a function of being the system of record and then building workflows and systems on top of that system of record. And so in this new era that we're moving towards now, what I'm really curious about, both from an angel investing perspective and also, vis-a-vis sort of the work I do in terms of like product leadership, is actually people moving to systems of action. So when you have a system like Render where you're running your application, then the layer on top of that is not, that's really valuable, is actually about, okay, how do I make sure that my application is, self-healing, that like if there's something that goes wrong, we can some entity takes action and resolves it, ideally without having to engage my engineering team. And I think there are applications of this notion of system of action across many of these software, many categories now. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for from an angel investing perspective, like who's tackling that problem and how are they interacting with existing products as well.
Fascinating. Yeah. And just kind of switching gears, but it's somewhat related. The platforms that you've worked on, from Heroku to Slack to Figma to Render, are infrastructure that millions of people depend on without even thinking about it sometimes. And most product leaders don't get to say that. What do you think is the responsibility that kind of comes with building at that level of invisible adoption?
I think that a lot of what we did at Figma and at the work that my team does at Render is really thinking about our products as productivity tools. And so when you're thinking about, when that's your core frame, when you're designing, the kinds of decisions you're making are really about, how do I help my user achieve their goal most efficiently? How do I really make sure that I understand what my user's actually trying to accomplish, and then derive the design and sort of all of the product choices we're making around achieving that. And that is really your responsibility, because otherwise you have this risk of being a meaningful tax on someone's workday, which is ultimately like, a drag on them. And so that's an immense amount of responsibility, I think, to have as people building software. And so a lot of the kinds of things that there's this feature in Figma I talk about a lot with my team, because it's one of my favorite features. And to be very clear, I did not build it or conceive of it, but there's this feature in Figma called selection colors. And what it does is, when you have like a design open on the canvas and you highlight a bunch of frames, it'll give you the option to change all of the like colors from one color to another, regardless of whether or not those parts of the design are related. And that's really fantastic, because let's say you were just trying a bunch of different ideas and you wanted to subtly change like a color. That's a really efficient and fast way to do it. And that's the kind of thinking that I think can be applied in DevTools across, like, obviously web design and design at large, and really all productivity tools. But it requires like a very strong understanding, to Rachel, your earlier point, and expertise about what is your user's workflow and goals, and really sitting with these problems for a really long period of time, so that you can develop the insight that, like, oh, actually, a really great way to solve this problem would be this. And cumulatively, if you can have these insights and bring these types of interactions into your product, cumulatively, those give developers or designers or whoever your customer is just like a profoundly delightful experience. Like customers love when the product really sees them. And that's what that experience is like. And that, I think, is really what I try to coach and create the conditions for in the teams I build, coming from this experience.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's awesome to hear kind of just about like your entire career and picking out all of these really great senior operating roles at some of our most, I think, like just well-known companies that are building for builders. And it's interesting you haven't, thought about like or maybe you have thought about founding your own company, but curious if you've ever thought about that versus joining another company.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I've been having a lot of, different conversations with product leaders recently. And one of the big shifts that I'm noticing is that it used to be that, there were product leaders and then founders, and those were like different kinds of people. And what I'm noticing increasingly, and I think this is certainly what you have noticed as well, is that founding is becoming like a new option for product leaders. And it's increasingly seen as potentially even a destination on the career journey for especially like exceptional, commercially minded design and customer oriented product managers, to really kind of exit the structure of a company and go and take their insights and their ideas and build them out on their own. And I'm finding increasingly that the conversations I'm having with other product leaders are starting to take more and more of that shape.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting shift.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you're also an angel investor, which means that you're evaluating founders and product bets from the outside. How has that practice sort of changed how you think about your own product decisions when you're inside of a company?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing I think it has shifted is that I'm probably much, much more interested in why I think a decision is the right decision than I would be if I wasn't also investing. And what I mean by that is when you're building a product in a company context, there's so many different things that kind of influence or can influence the kinds of decisions that you make, ranging from like, okay, my team is really aligned on this, so let's go with it, or there's sort of potentially like leadership has a perspective on something. And I think what angel investing has taught me or reminded me is that at the end of the day, the market tells you the information that you need. Either the business either works or it doesn't. The customer either wants the product or doesn't want it. And it's kind of this like really grounding reminder that like when you're building products, I think in a company context, there can be a lot of different kinds of signals internally and externally. But I think the best product managers are really able to kind of let that noise recede to the back, think very clearly, and then obviously like build the stakeholder alignment and align and influence across the company to make the right thing happen. But angel investing is a very good reminder of how your decisions do actually matter considerably in terms of
Yeah.
whether or not your company is ultimately successful, your product's ultimately successful. And so I find that can be like a really good, brings me back to kind of ground truth about products a lot, especially as I've had the great fortune, as I know you also, Amber, have had, which is we've now watched companies grow and evolve over time. That I think is really where you really see like, okay, the folks who could really learn and pay attention, they're now starting to see more success, or they've navigated their company in a way that's really strong, and the folks who kind of maybe weren't as clear-eyed about the situation, maybe felt
Right.
didn't quite work out. And so I think, having that perspective, I think is incredibly valuable for product leaders.
Yeah. I love what you said about how angel investing sort of shifts how you make decisions a little bit, or at least the thought process that you're going through. As you know, like we onboard, 10 to 20 angels into our angel investing community at the council alongside of our venture fund like every quarter. And we walk them through like a 6-week angel investing course. And we always talk to them about that because that was my experience starting to angel invest coming out of the Snap IPO. And while I was working at Cruise, I really feel like decision making is a muscle. And until it's sort of your own dollars on the line, you're not really thinking through like everything. And I used to wonder, hey, if I was promoted to like CEO of my company, and I had to be the final person like making the decision, could I do it? And would I be happy with the decisions I made? And I do feel like I got more reps in and just more comfortable with that. And it made me a better operator. So I love that take.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm also curious, and I'm sure our listeners would be, especially any of the PMs that are listening out there, but what's one thing that like, being a VP or leader of product that nobody outside the role, even senior PMs, fully really understands until they're in it?
I think that the biggest thing about being in a leadership role from a product perspective is that, especially in the early days of or early years of a company, is that the product strategy and the company strategy are really, really intimately tied. And so when you're in that VP of product role, you're basically doing two things. You're trying to work with the CEO to shape their vision and uncover their insights and intuition about where the market's going, about what the product should be, about what the vision is. And at the same time, you're also working, you know, at very, very low levels, pixel levels, all the way up to kind of strategy levels with everyone in the company to try to make sure that you're learning how to execute and learning how to iterate, and ideally turning your company into something of a learning machine so that you can effectively iterate on that product over time. And I think the thing that I think especially when I talk to people who are going into the VP of product role, that I have I want to caution people around is this idea that the founder or CEO should kind of hand off product decisions to the VP of product. I actually think that that's not wise and generally not the way in which most healthy long-term partnerships between VP of product and CEO and also companies can really move. And so the frame that I like to offer for the VP of product role is that your responsibility is really to take the best of the founder's vision, intuition, help them test it against the market. Because to Amber's point, a lot of this is going to be tested with early decisions, and you're helping to facilitate that, and you're bringing in your own perspective, your own intuitions, your own experience to help sharpen it. But then also you're a very effective and very important translation layer, both from the product team and their ideas and their insights back to the CEO. And the thing that I think is really important that most people don't fully understand is how that role is really about shaping and iteration and building alignment and clarity for both that early founding team as well as the product team. And the reason I think people don't fully grasp that is because there is this sort of idea that maybe the product team should own the product direction. But I think that the reality is that that's not possible. Like, because all these companies that we're building are that the strategy is going to be so much around what the product can and can't do and how it serves in the market. And I think it's wise to kind of start to build that understanding early, especially for folks who take on VP of product roles, and really get very, very good at mind melding and sort of with your founder team, because a lot of founding teams are excellent because they have these sort of intuitions and ideas about the opportunity that in some places may not be fully legible or easily articulated. And so it's really, really your prerogative to kind of uncover those and figure out a way to make them more legible to the rest of the organization, and also like help the team kind of check them against reality.
Awesome. Well, we're going to transition to our rapid fire questions. So feel free to just keep your answers super succinct. Say the first word that comes to mind. So I will go ahead and go first. So what do you think is the most underrated skill for a product leader at a developer tools company?
I was going to say brevity. I think you can easily go into all the technical details, and really getting homing in on what's important is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And a daily habit that keeps you sharp.
Sleep.
Oh my gosh, love that one.
I think it's very important to
Need
prioritize
more.
sleep.
What's one person or one company whose product decisions you study most closely these days?
I'm really looking at anyone who's building something that looks like an AI wrapper or like an LLM wrapper, because I think that there's something there that I'm trying to uncover what makes those excellent or what makes them easy to absorb into a foundation model.
And what's a controversial belief about developer tools that would get you booed at a conference?
I think my most controversial belief is what I've said at the top, which is that developer tools are basically consumer products, and that the ones with the best design, the best brand, the sort of are really the ones that win. I think that people don't want to admit that.
Nice. And then what's a product decision that you've made at any of the companies that you would completely reverse if you could?
So when I worked at Figma, one of the things we did as part of Figma organization was introduce branching so that you could have different versions of designs. And I think this was an example of taking customer requests too literally. We were trying to unblock a major deal. We wanted to meet that customer with what they wanted. And I think if I could reverse it, we probably wouldn't have done that. We would have tried to find a more nuanced way to address their concerns versus going all the way and building a complicated feature.
Awesome. Well, it's been awesome having you on First Builders today and hearing more about your experience. Where can people follow you and keep up with your work, and what should they be paying most attention to at Render right now?
Yeah, so feel free to follow me on Twitter or X. My handle is Meagan Gamache, or you can follow me on LinkedIn as well. At Render, we are going to be launching a lot of exciting new products over the course of the next few months, and I would really encourage you to come and attend any of our events. We'll be having events in different cities, and I'll be posting about that on my social. And especially if you're an AI builder, building agents or AI apps, we really want to talk to you and hear from you.
Awesome. Well, it's wonderful to have you on today, and thanks so much.
Thank you both for having me. This was fun.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. Awesome. That was an awesome conversation. And it was just great to hear just all of her learnings from all the different companies, also all the fantastic companies that she's been able to be a part of. What stood out to you from the conversation?
I mean, definitely a lot, but I think at a high level, I think craft and brand and taste kind of, I guess I should say craft and brand like played a big role in a lot of the learnings that she had from her earliest moves all the way to like what she's working on at Render right now. And I think that's so important for companies right now because building is getting commoditized in some ways, and it becomes more about how you reach your audience and the customers that you do have and how you build for them and anticipate their issues. And I thought that, that also really fed into what she was talking about, where commercial sense over taste is going to be more important than it was before. I only partly agree on that. I think taste is still extremely important because you look at some of these tools that have come out, like obviously coding with Claude, but then also Claude Design. And you can make great products by just building your own thing and having your set of eyes being the only two eyes looking upon it until it's being used. But if you really want to set it apart and be like the one thing that people are choosing to come back to and work in and pay for, it's going to be, I think taste is still going to play a big role in making things stand out. But I agree that commercial sense and expertise is so important. And I think we've seen that in our top portfolio companies. I mean, some of the biggest movers, GCAI and Joyful Health, both have that in common.
Yeah.
They understand the workflows that they're building for really well.
And I wonder if taste is just another kind of term for
Yes.
expertise, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like, as you were
exactly.
saying that, because I just think we talk a lot about this at the council of just how like expertise is really what sets you apart with AI. And you need to have that expertise in order to even make the judgment call on how to use AI tools and all of that as well. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Exactly. And then I thought what she said about, following friends, going like, you look at her career and it's like, just keep scrolling through LinkedIn. You keep seeing like breakout successes and recognizable companies that she joined in the founding days or like the founding platform days.
Absolutely.
And so I liked that advice. Some folks listening to the podcast might be wondering, like, how did she do that? And we've had a couple of those sort of folks on the podcast before. And that has been a common theme, is just like, where are the best people working and what can I learn from them? And if you have the decision to work at one of those places versus another place, it might be worth taking an earlier risk to go work alongside people that you think highly of and you're going to learn a lot from. So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, and I hope she does end up founding something someday.
I
feel
know.
like.
I like how you planted that question in there, put her on the spot. Yeah. So I've already put a little, tidbit in her ear that if she ever does, we want to hear from her.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, well, awesome. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It means a great deal for us. Share it with a friend and subscribe to First Builders wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, and don't forget to also subscribe to the Council newsletter for more founder stories and frameworks that you can apply to your own company. We'll leave all these links down in the comments.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.